And welcome to An Hour with the Candidates on LPTV, Libertarian Party Television, a production of the Libertarian Party. My name is Pat Ford. I currently serve as chairman of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island. We share a few purposes for this show every week. We want to give the libertarian community an opportunity to meet our wonderful down-ballot candidates literally from around the country. We want to challenge them to incorporate lunch pail issues, the type of domestic issues that are important to a small community, a large city, a congressional district, perhaps an entire state, through a libertarian perspective, in a way to introduce the libertarian movement to voters around the country. Equally important, we want to tie together the libertarian community. We need to understand that candidates running for down-ballot races, from senator to town council to school boards, a candidate in Washington is as important to the movement to a people in Washington as a candidate is in, say, Long Island, New York. Someone running for water board in Maine, they've got just as much impact on our movement as, say, someone running for state rep in Arizona. And in doing so, encourage cooperation, financial support, moral support, and maybe a few angry phone calls to television stations or newspapers who would preclude our great candidates from participating in what is clearly becoming a national debate. We've got two great candidates tonight. Joining us first is David Tyler. He is a candidate for the East Ridge City Council in East Ridge, Tennessee. David, why don't you join us, and welcome to An Hour with the Candidates.
Thanks for having me, Pat. Glad to be here.
No, absolutely. You know, this is a perfect example of why we have this show. There are folks running for literally every level of office here in America within the Libertarian Party. Of course, we've got our great presidential and vice presidential candidates, Joe and Spike. But I will tell you that the folks who have the potential to have the most impact on a community, on people's lives, are people who are running for school boards, fire boards, water boards, mass transportation boards, and of course, representative town meetings. That's uniquely a New England thing, I think, or town councils, because it is at that level of governance that we can apply libertarian principles, small government, self-ownership, responsible stewardship of community resources. That's how we bring those issues to ordinary people in their very ordinary lives. So David, congratulations for running, and just tell us a little bit about East Ridge. My research tells me that you are very much a suburb of Chattanooga, that a lot of the major media emanates from Chattanooga. But give us a reflection on your community, its makeup economically, these days socially, economically, and what constitutes its local economy.
So we're near Chattanooga, though you got it up on the map. We're basically right on the bubble of Chattanooga. When you're passing through, I think it's Interstate 27 or 75 South, and you're coming through Tennessee, the last city you pass through before going into Georgia is East Ridge, Tennessee. Socioeconomically, we're, a bunch of people between the age of 30 and 50. I think the average income is around $33,000. We've had a lot of economic development here lately. The state passed a thing called the border region land tax. And any city that borders another state can use 75% of the sales tax revenue as a pass-through to incentivize businesses, along the exits there. And, we've had a brand new Top Golf come in. It's a prototype too. It's not like your normal Top Golf. It's a real one of a kind. And we have a Bass Pro Shop in a city that just, maybe had a handful of restaurants before. They've been cropping up pretty like mad lately. So we have a lot of growth here that the community is really in support of, and they're very excited about. But when we started to do the development for the Top Golf and the Bass Pro Shop, the city had to buy some land from the state and to make this deal happen. And then they turned and sold the property to the developers at cost. And then the city footed the bill for a lot of the build out. So now we're operating, with $12 million of debt. And, that kind of growth in an economy like we have right now is not very responsible, especially when the tax revenues are what the city budget are being based off of for 2021 projections. And, we've had a lack of sales revenue because most of the businesses here in East Ridge are restaurants and retail and, hair salons. So we took a massive hit early on. And so, as a city here in East Ridge, we should be mindful as citizens about, how our government is doing business, and we see if we can, steer them in a direction that is more responsible for the long term. Because this is a good community. There's a lot of opportunity for young Americans, young Tennesseans to move here and, get their first home. There's good schools, a lot of areas for walking, so low income families can do well here. We have a good police department that's, ran really well. We have a very good police chief here. And the mayor and city council are actually not doing that bad of a job. I think they've inherited some poor policies from previous administrations and previous city managers. But I think their vision for the city is going to do really well. But luckily, this is a nonpartisan race for me. So I'm not actually having to run as a libertarian, but my campaign platform is all libertarian.
Let's dig into this sort of development, this style of development, because quite frankly, it's rampant for a few reasons. What's called TIF style financing has become quite the rage in communities, where they dedicate the sales tax from a particular neighborhood or set of neighborhoods or region into supporting the debt, if you will, for privately owned property. And when you see that on one level, first of all, you're often met with the notion that, well, that's how things are done, private public partnerships. And we've had a lot of experience here in Rhode Island fighting that, because it's, quite frankly, what you're looking at is government picking winners and losers, government, if you will, taking the tax dollars from one privately owned business, where very often sweat equity was the foundation upon which it was built on, very often self-finance, and they're taking their tax dollars to support the creation of other businesses, and they're ultimately competing for the same consumer dollar, particularly in a time when retail is very challenged. So what you've literally got, as we've spoken with entrepreneurs here in Rhode Island, is you've got the specter of, say, if I owned a business, me literally working to support competition for the same dollar. So, from a perspective of, well, I'll use the word fairness, not one of my favorite words, but fairness. But from the perspective of a libertarian who believes in truly free markets, do you think that perhaps they should be looking at just lowering the sales tax for everyone rather than slicing it, dicing it, so to support individual investments? And do you think that's a conversation or an argument that would be heard in your neck of the woods?
Well, like I said, the development here is rather popular. If it's not something I could actually campaign on if I wanted to. A lot of the people see the growth, and to them that, they've already been sold the idea that that's going to make their property value increase, and which it could be true, and it could help bolster the city budget. It could also be true, but there were mechanisms that the city planners at the time used to get these deals through. So the state of Tennessee itself kind of did away with mass eminent domain, but the city council of East Ridge at the time in 2018 found a workaround to where they could call blighted zones. Right. And then they sent letters to all the people who lived in areas that they wanted to do development, and saying that they lived in a blighted red zone, in order to, force them out of their properties to do development. Luckily, we had the Institute for Justice step in and help us get that squashed. And now there are libertarians outside of the state who have reached out to me about East Ridge specifically to try to get a bill passed through the Tennessee State House to where they can't blight whole zones, and they would have to do it on a property by property basis. But as for lowering the tax revenues, I believe that would be a good approach to get, tax rates for businesses to come into East Ridge would be, a very good strategy for getting people to develop there. Our land isn't very expensive, and there are lots of opportunities. But we also have that's close. All of the developments happening is over next to the highway. When the city itself, when you get closer down the main road, the closer you get to Chattanooga, the city kind of seems like it's aging and degrading. And then by the time you get to where Chattanooga is, it almost seems to meet the requirement of the blighted zone.
Right.
But since it doesn't fall within the border region land tax area, they're not aiming for rejuvenating those places. And there's a fear amongst the citizens of my city that eventually that could turn into a more crime infested area if we didn't spend time cleaning it up.
Right, and here's the challenge. Under the Trump tax laws, they created something called these opportunity zones, which allows all sorts of development. And as is so typical when it comes to the central planning, if you will, the folks that came in and jumped in were wealthy developers who then turned to things like big box retail or multi-use, which ultimately does not impact the local communities in the manner in which the bill was intended. The bill was intended to take neighborhoods that had not seen significant investment and realize perhaps infrastructure gains and job opportunities. In fact, as is almost typical with a federal program, it fell to a pool of developers who are, working in conjunction with big state government of the duopoly, and they're implementing these in areas while the areas that really need a break, like, as you mentioned, parts of Chattanooga, actually suffer disproportionately because the investment money is being drawn literally to the other side of town. It's crazy what happens with all these crony corporate deals where you realize extraordinary breaks either in capital gains taxes or whatever. To me, it's a prime opportunity for libertarians across the country to stand up and say, let's rethink this. Let's talk about this. Let's understand exactly what's happening in the process. Fighting corporate welfare and fighting corporate cronyism is powerful stuff, and a target-rich opportunity for the movement. How about the schools in your town? Is Tennessee give opportunities for school choice, or are you largely beholden to education by what's called zip code?
Well, if you can see my room here behind me, I'm a homeschool dad. We've been homeschooling our children since they started school, and I have a third grader and a first grader now. So the schools here are good. I grew up in these public schools. I think nationally I don't know how they rank, but it's not great. I didn't feel like I was underserved by the public school system. But the public school system isn't adjusting to the advances in education that we have now. We found out through COVID-19 that you could probably homeschool most every citizen, and you wouldn't have to stick children in a prison for 8 hours a day, and they could actually, take a focused study to what they would actually like to do when they grow older. And my children are getting a fairly good education, but they want to be computer programmers and they want to be video game designers and composers, and they can do that. They can take coding classes right now, and they're not beholden to bureaucracy saying that they have to meet X, Y, and Z standard, to push them to a system that's meant to, that was designed to put them into either the military or a factory. Our school system suffers, from the ills of what most of the school systems in this country face, which is, lack of choice. We have some charter schools, but they have lotteries, and we put, I think, my oldest son in a lottery when we were considering which school to use, and he's going into the third grade and he's still not been selected. So in that, the lottery itself really helps a lot of disadvantaged people in this area they can't really wait till tomorrow, to years down the road to get a good education, because they're in a school where they could, be potentially face, bad teaching or just disruptive classes, and whether they shove police in every corner of the school. But like the schools here in Chattanooga are fairly decent, but we are starting to see a problem where there are local there are organizations taking over the local school board. What used to be a fairly inexpensive race to run for school board now has millions of dollars being poured into it from outside the state to get through, initiatives that our citizens did not agree upon, and now we have school board members, all basically are the same members of this organization, which I can't remember off the top of my head. But,
Right.
But we are seeing outside corporate interests being poured into the schools, and I'm not sure that if they're exactly corporate interests, but they're definitely, they have an agenda, and it's not for better educating the children. I believe that they're trying to, just make money off the system instead of doing what's best for the children.
No, you're absolutely right. It's corporations have come to understand, and that's why so many of them now spend as much time financing Democratic candidates as they did traditionally your Republican or right of center candidates, because there are amazing opportunities to profit from government institutions, whether it be transactions like transfer payments, tax payments, to profit transactionally, or to create school systems filled with folks who are going to be coders. And, it's interesting when they talk about, we're going to give you a high-tech education. Well, what really supports a high-tech education when you're a young child is a classical liberal education. Now, that has nothing to do with whether you're a liberal or a conservative. What it means is the study of the classics, learning how to reason, critical thinking, tools like that are largely being eliminated from a lot of government schools, which why I say if you homeschool or if you somehow can find a way, and it's tough and not everyone can do it. And it is not fair, to me, the dirtiest four-letter word in the English language. But if you can find a way to remove your child from what is called by some radical libertarians as theft education, if you can do that somehow, then you're all the more better for it. And schools do not compete, and you're starting to see firsthand the kind of bureaucracy creep that's taken over a good part of our nation's schools. And in terms of these schools are no longer for the children. Children are almost treated as a necessary inconvenience in order to foster these large scale bureaucracies, the government educational complex, which is why it's so important that people like you run for city council and board of educations, because you're the first line of defense in this. And you're the first person that's going to say, wait a minute, let's take a step back and let's think about what we're doing. Now, I know you have you've taken an interesting approach to building your constituency, and I think it's very worthwhile talking about. You've immersed yourself, from what I understand, in a variety of civic organizations. Talk to us about that approach you're taking and how you're, in other words, becoming part of the DNA of the community.
Right. So a little bit of a background. I was a restaurateur with a franchise restaurant for about 11 years. For the last 4 years, I was a franchisee, and I had my own restaurant. We took over a underperforming restaurant, and we shaped it up a little bit and turned it into a little profit machine. But after doing that for about 3 or 4 years, I ran into an incident where I had 4 of my employees were homeless and living in the storage shed that I had out back.
Wow.
And it's just one of those things that just really breaks your heart. I had to evict them. I put them up in a hotel for the night and stayed with them, bought them dinner and breakfast. And then I never saw them ever again. They never showed back up for work. That really challenged me as a libertarian to figure out what could I do in my own community, because my restaurant wasn't here. It was near North Atlanta, and I live about an hour and a half away. And I was I don't want to see these problems in my own community. And we have 125 homeless people who are fed every Thursday in my community, and we only have 25,000 people. and the problem is not getting any better. So I decided that I was going to fold out the restaurant business and go back to college, run for office, and get more involved locally with my with my county Libertarian Party and my state party, to see what we can do as far as activists, to do some real good in the community. So I began attending city council meetings and taking notes. I looked for members of the community who were doing the most help, or trying the hardest to make the place better for those disadvantaged in the community. And I got involved with the food bank. We call it the food pantry. And then I've been reaching out to several churches who have been doing a good working with first responders. We had some tornadoes blow through earlier the year, and it was bad. It looks like a bomb went off. And this preacher, local guy, Daniel Beard, with Action Church, lost power for several days and decided to, instead of letting all of the food go bad in his refrigerator and in his deep freezer, that he would just cook it all off and hand it all out. And he fed the first responders for several weeks, just by pulling the community together. And that was really inspiring to me, to what a vision for a city government could really look like, by being a leader in the city. You could pull together and get organizations who are doing the best, and inspiring people to come out and actually help their neighbors and be good voluntary citizens. And in my time, for my strategy for my campaign, I stumbled across the city councilwoman who was actually running for re-election in this particular race. We became friends. She is my mentor. She really has taken to me quite a bit, and she's been introducing me to all the right people. I've been placed on a couple of different committees to, just sit in and be a helping hand. But, I've had meetings with the mayor and the city manager, and, I think my campaign is moving forward in the correct direction. And I had received some bad advice from a few people on how I should do this and that, go on the offensive, attack people. And I just didn't see that as being beneficial to my community. I wanted the campaign to serve the community. I think that's going to get me elected. I actually believe I'm going to win this. And the next step after that is to find a candidate who can run for a statewide race for ballot access, or try to help somebody get into a legislative position, so we can do some real good in the state of Tennessee. But as far as my ambitions go, I really need to work on and fix my own backyard first. If anyone out there is interested in making a difference in your community, start volunteering. Find the people who are doing good work. Show up, keep your mouth shut, use your strong back or arms or whatever you got, to help them get the job done. Shake their hand and walk out. I don't think I've told anyone outside of the city councilwoman that I was running for office in any of this, mainly because I just don't see the point. I think it's a distraction, and they might question my motives. But I think that, in order for us to create a proper voluntary society, we need to lead by action, and not by rhetoric and words. I'm not going to bring anyone to libertarianism by condemning them for believing in, for having political beliefs opposite than mine. And I'd like to see them see my life and, think it's just something that they would like to have. And I tell people I homeschool my kids that it freaks some people out. But when I explain that, hey, we do school for about an hour and a half, 2 hours a day for, 5 days a week. And the rest of the week is just spent having a good time as a family and bonding and being together. And, they look at that and they just cannot believe that that's even a thing that can happen. And it really can happen. We were talking about it earlier. It's just, people can't do it. Not everyone can do it. You are correct. Luckily, I had the benefit of being restaurant hours, so I can have work nights and stuff. But our system, our world is moving to where people can work remotely. They can work at their own hours from their house, from their cars even, and the people's lives can become more flexible when we develop more of an agarist system using AI. And I believe we'll see a lot more of this stuff going on. But once again, this last get involved with the community. If you're out there listening and you want to run for office, get involved with the community and see where the help needs to be. You'll find the right people, and they'll start pointing you in the right places. Shoot for a nonpartisan race. It's going to be a little easier. But we got to start winning over City Hall before we take over the White House.
Absolutely. So if I could sum up your approach, the best way to build a voluntary society is to ultimately work to create one within your own world. And by serving as an example to the rest of the community, you destroy the notion that libertarianism is selfish, self-centered, that we are out for ourselves, that we support a corporatist society, when we in fact are leading the way by example, by diving firsthand into fixing societal ills. It's a powerful, powerful message to people, and it's one that's completely unanticipated, unexpected.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself, actually.
Yeah, so I applaud you on that. Just a couple minutes left in this segment. We'll bring you back again, but we always joke about it. This is where we engage in some shameless self-promotion. Races cost money. They need volunteers. They need support. Sometimes it's moral support. Sometimes it's the ability for you to remotely make some phone calls to potential constituents on election day, kind of the get out the vote effort. There are 1,000 ways that you can support candidates around the country. And if you're of that libertarian that's frustrated by, well, just everything right now, it's a hard world politically. We're trying to change the world in a world that is confronting us with unparalleled challenges. But there are still ways to get involved, and it's candidacies just like this where you can you can change people's world by getting involved in candidacies like this. So tell us where folks can find out more about you, where they can donate, where they can reach you if they want to volunteer, perhaps make some phone calls for you. Give us the 411.
Sure. Yeah. So I've had my website up here the whole time. Down here, votedavidtyler.com. If you want to go, you can sign up for updates on the campaign. You can donate at votedavidtyler.com/donate. I have facebook.com/votedavidtyler if you want to go and support some of my social media. My Twitter is at GoGozer. That's my personal Twitter, but I use it for the campaign. Mainly if you want to help support my campaign, do the same thing for your community. I could take your money all day, and it would be extremely appreciated. Don't get me wrong. I do need to win. That's the strategy. But get involved in your local LP. That's what's going to help my campaign. We need more people winning these easy races, man. We need to start taking over our own communities. No one's ever going to take libertarians seriously until we start doing the real serious nitty-gritty work that needs to be done in our own communities and make them a little bit more libertarian, just so people can see what it looks like to have effective governance that is for the people, by the people, and that empowers the individual. And I think we can all get there together. So, once again, thank you for having me on your show.
David.
I'm looking forward to seeing Tom. That guy's a riot.
Yeah, David, thank you so very much. We'll be talking in about a half hour or so. So I want to bring up Thomas Daniel Queter. He's running for the New York State Senate in the big District 52. His slogan is outstanding: never quitter and rarely quieter. Thomas Daniel, welcome to our show tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So give us, I didn't get a chance to ask David this question, but I'd like you to tell us, get personal here for a second. What was your libertarian moment? At what point in your lifetime was it an event, an individual, a mentor, something you read that said, that all of a sudden opened your eyes to the potential of a libertarian lifestyle?
Long before I knew what the Libertarian Party was, actually.
Mm-hmm.
my fifth grade teacher was a real big history buff, and he was very 1776 himself. And he made sure that our class understood the reason for our Constitution, the reason behind the Bill of Rights, the reason for our right to bear arms, and the reasons for our freedoms. So while I haven't registered for any party until last year, I definitely feel like I've always been a libertarian because I refused the other two parties until I found the Libertarian Party.
It's an awesome moment when all of a sudden, number one, you realize, hey, there's people just like me out there. So it's a little bit relaxing in that perspective. But when you understand, when your eyes open to that which you had always believed, and came to understand that you're part of a bigger movement that you may never have known about until some precipitating event, it's something you take with you forever. And well, listen, it's only been a year or so, but welcome. We need folks like you. We've had a few people.
Today is the 19th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Exactly 1 year today since I registered.
If the audience could all, from the comfort of their own homes, sing "Happy Libertarian Birthday" to Thomas, I think we could all do that, and I promise not to on the air. But happy Libertarian Birthday. Maybe that's something we need to, maybe there's a thing there. We need to start observing that nationally, that everyone should figure out what their Libertarian birthday is and post that on the Facebook as opposed to your real birthday. Because ultimately, Thomas, wasn't that when you really became free?
Oh, I don't know. I was 4.5 years old when I got my first wheelchair. I've never taken a step, but I was 3.5 years old the first time I ran away from home. So it's kind of hard to say that I was ever not free.
Excellent. So now you're running in upstate New York. We've had a wealth of candidates on from a variety of places of upstate New York. If nothing, anyone who's watched this show over its first few months, if you will, since its birth, has come to understand that New York is a vast place. And Larry Sharp can probably attest to that, given the yeoman's work he did in covering literally the entire state of New York. Tell us about your community.
Well, I'm from Mount Upton, New York, which is a small hamlet of a town called Guilford. There's not a whole lot here. We have a gas station, a restaurant, a park, and a construction company, and a trucking company. But that's literally it for businesses. You see them pop up and die off soon thereafter. And if you know anything about New York, you know it's not the best place to start a business. Mm-hmm. The taxation, the fees, the rent, the property values, it's tough. It's tough. And what people fail to realize about my district in particular is that geographically it's largely agricultural land and it's largely unused. We used to have a thriving agriculture economy in central New York. Mm-hmm. And now it's really kind of hit or miss whether or not people can make it work. I'd like to see property tax incentives for land being brought back to use and producing something that adds to the economy, whether it's a vegetable garden, growing hemp, growing medical marijuana, or whatever it is. If it's producing, it should get some kind of incentive because our economy here at this rate is going down the hole so fast. It's hard to watch. Just in my lifetime, I've watched the communities around here degrade. That's why I volunteer a lot. I've even volunteered for the Ladies Auxiliary that supports the firehouse years ago. Mm-hmm. But I'm on the board of a nonprofit that serves those with disabilities, which today includes the elderly and those with addiction problems even. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's an important fact right there. In New York, our nonprofits are largely restrained. The amount of administrative work and regulation from the state on nonprofits that are beholden to state money because their communities don't have enough left when the state's done to fund them, that they're actually oppressed in how much they can help. I mean, the help they can offer is reduced by the unnecessary regulation. And speaking of unnecessary regulation, one of the things that nonprofits for those with disabilities do is actually get people through the state systems to receive the benefits or welfare that they might need. To that note, there is a universal assessment system in New York. It's a rather long, complicated form, essentially. And in my case, they lost my legs. They had me put down as having feet but no legs and the ability to drive without assistive technology. That just shows you how convoluted these systems have become. And we need to change that. We need to put that back in the county's hands. We need to get rid of the extraneous documentation. A lot of people forget just how much overhead is built in with regulation. I read recently that somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 hospitals or doctors could be had for the current overhead costs if we just rolled back the unnecessary regulations and um, administrative overreach or overreach of administrative requirements.
Right. If you subject volunteers to this sort of Byzantine accounting where there's legal liability and drain their time and their resources, that to me is the ultimate Kafkaesque governmental nightmare. Because the purpose of volunteerism and community is independent support, no strings attached. You do things simply because they're the right things to do. And the notion that government would tie that up is, to me, is disgusting. I worked in New York City for many years. I actually had a small business in New York City. And to that end, that was 15 to 20 years ago. That was the beginning of really, like I said, this Kafkaesque, nightmarish government that grows disproportionately and takes away and drains so many of the efforts of people's lives. But you're a living testament to the fact that you're not going to allow it. What would be the first project? And let me frame it this way: you were elected to the state assembly. In a perfect world, they say, well, you know what, you're a libertarian, so we're going to let you choose exactly what you want to get involved in. What committee, what space would you want to work in as a libertarian state representative?
Well, I'd want to go after just about anything that oppresses the economy. The real problems here are that we're not allowed to take care of ourselves because we're overtaxed, we're overburdened, and nobody really has the money or the time to volunteer anymore. We absolutely need to go after one specific thing in my mind. If you've read up on me at all, you know that I have been a disability advocate, independent, not beholden to rules, for about 6 years. And it's pretty simple. Most people can actually do this. You can join a group for those with disabilities, and you can look for the problems that are pretty obvious, and you can do a little Googling, and you can help point them in the right direction. And I've been able to do this across the nation with a computer. If I can do that, then more people could do that. But here's the thing. In New York, we have something called the Office for Advocacy for Those with Disabilities. And the interesting thing about that office is that when our Justice Center reorganized, it ceased to function, which means our governor is currently, and has been for many years, making sweeping policy changes without any actual advisement based on the actual need at hand. He recently cut $75 million from CDPAP, which is a program that provides home care. As libertarians, we don't really want to fund all these programs. We want to bring them back to the communities, and I think that would fall under home rule. A lot of New York State's hierarchy is overreaching to a degree that is ridiculous. Our nonprofits have to worry about accounting for a candy bar if they buy one. Our churches are dwindling because nobody can afford to fund them. And our volunteer projects are going downhill. My own community, when my parents were growing up here, they had community events funded voluntarily through the fire department, often, a lot of them. And we're down to, I think, just 2 or 3. Some good friends of mine are involved, and they're trying to change that, but it's hard. It's very hard.
Well, if you
Insurance
look,
requirements prevent us from having parades a lot of years. Yeah,
right.
it's ridiculous. We shouldn't be imposing that kind of overreach on our small communities.
No, you're absolutely right. There's an existential crisis facing volunteerism right now, and the way I call it is sort of a vicious cycle, because on one hand, government attempts to co-opt and to, if you will, acquire the responsibility, and COVID's, by the way, a perfect example of this. The government's failed, flawed response to COVID, but the government essentially nationalizes, governmentalizes, co-ops all the responses to a variety of society challenges. And in doing so, creates vast bureaucracies which take lots of money, it raises taxes, raises the price of everything, and so that folks have to work often 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They have to, cobble together this sort of gig slash job slash economy for their own families in order to get by. Well, of course, how much time, if in fact you're even in a dual parent, dual partner relationship, how much time does that allow for volunteering? And it also, there's a crisis of confidence, because ultimately it creates this atmosphere where, well, listen, I pay taxes for that stuff. Why do I got to do it? I'm paying for it. And you know what? I can't blame those people, because they are. But in doing so, the joy is gone. The connection to the community is gone. And quite frankly, very often the efficacy and the quality of the delivery of services is gone as well. And what do we accomplish?
That's absolutely correct. I'm actually sitting in a crowd-funded wheelchair right now. It's the same brand as the last 5 wheelchairs I've had. And since the Medicare initiative rolled out through New York, I was forced onto Medicare a few years ago. I'm 37. When that happened, they lowered all of the line item cap numbers for what they would purchase. So I could no longer get a wheelchair that I could sit in without becoming injured to the point of having to be bedridden after just a few months. My needs are pretty specific, but they're easy to meet. And at the same time, the state was telling me, well, we'll pay $19,000 for this piece of crap that'll kill you, but you can't have what you need. I find that to be absolutely ridiculous. But the fun fact here is that we crowdfunded that. It only took 3 months. It can take up to 18 months to get a wheelchair through the system. And we did that for 1/3 the cost.
Wow.
And, oddly enough, this wheelchair was shipped to me out of Austin, Texas. I was looking forward to going back there this year for the convention, but we saw the COVID situation throw a hiccup in that. So I am looking forward to going to Orlando next month. And, you're talking about taxes and the efficacy of them. My first cousin was at the Pittsburgh protest when someone next to him got his eyes shot out by a rubber bullet. And then the tear gas came down, and my cousin's pretty upset that his tax dollars paid for the tear gas he had to inhale.
Yeah. You're looking at a militaristic state. I was just before we did the show, I was over at the Juneteenth observation in Providence, Rhode Island, and it was remarkable again for a few hundred literally high school kids who are running it in Providence. It's astonishing what's happening here. We had a heavily armed state police contingent blocking the doors to the people's house, the State House. What signal are they sending us? Some would say it's an attempt to intimidate. It's an attempt to display power. I would say, quite frankly, it's really an observation of their own personal fright and their own personal, shall we say, the fallacy of their display of strength. It's become pathetic, and we're the witness to this. And I don't know if they understand how fragile their control over us is at this point.
There's a lot of psychology in all of this that's going on right now. Again, with the COVID situation, people have been put out of work. In New York, over 100,000 businesses have been put under. Small businesses, not Walmarts. It's much easier to socially distance in small businesses than it is in Walmart. I don't know if you've been to Walmart lately, but we put down the businesses that could do a better job more safely. We restrained our healthcare system for decades before this, and we restrained them further to the point that they're laying off healthcare workers. That happened in the Syracuse area in particular. During a pandemic, we create a situation in which we are laying off our healthcare staff. That doesn't make any sense at all. But to a further note, New York rolled out with $1,000 fines and arrests for not socially distancing, and that upset a lot of people. The fear mongering that we saw come out of government over this pandemic, it's a real virus and it's absolutely deadly to some. But I think we absolutely overreacted. And there's an old saying when it comes to government: "Never let a good crisis go to waste," and they certainly did not. So when it comes to these protests, I'm hearing from people that I know that were there that it's not just one movement. It's almost all of them you could imagine. Everybody is there because everybody is upset for one reason or another, or many reasons. Now think about this. Humans are a volatile herding animal, whether we like to admit it or not. You put 100 or 1,000 of us in a group and then you surround them by armed men who are armored to the teeth. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen when you scare 1,000 people or thousands of people? You know, when these protests turn into riots, they like to blame the people. But to be quite honest with you, if you're going to intimidate and scare people, you have no right to not expect them to turn a bit hairier than they intended.
Well,
People are angry.
You're created the dry tinder for which unexpected, let's just say unanticipated results can happen. Well, let's talk about that for a second, because New York has become synonymous as one of the states with an obscene overreach into what are supposed to be the protections of the Second Amendment. You're well schooled on this. Just how difficult is it to, as just simply observe your constitutional guarantees in the great state of New York, the Empire State?
Well, that depends on your county. Actually, that's one thing that did leave somewhat to home rule. In my county, the last time I looked into it, it cost you $110 just to get your fingerprints done, and then you had to pay for a specific training course. Now, I've been around guns all my life. I don't own any personally because that's risky in New York. Owning a gun is risky in New York. I've seen fathers have their children taken away during a divorce for false statements made against them. I've seen their property removed, meaning their guns. Guns are property. We have the right to property. But, you know, the overreach goes even farther. All of these laws that are here to protect us, they usually don't. When I was in high school, the superintendent of my high school actually handed my mother an edited copy of the ADA, trying to claim that they didn't have to provide transportation for me to go to school. And then they purchased an inadequate and technically illegal bus to transport me on, where I was forced to sit in the back of a long bus. And there's an interesting comparison here. People forget why the Jim Crow laws forced black people to sit in the back of the bus. It's not a fun ride. It's bouncy. It's uncomfortable. And in my case, it broke my femurs. I'd been in school for probably 10 years or so, and my condition was well known. It's not a large school. I graduated with 45 people. But to save money, they decided to put me at risk. And that actually happened a few times. So our protections, legally, they're not there. They're just on paper. They're pieces of paper to be used when they want to. And when it comes to 2A, in some counties, it's almost impossible to get your conceal and carry permit. And in other counties, it's impossible to transfer one. A friend of mine was essentially red flagged because he moved from one county to another, and he thought he filed all his paperwork, and for whatever reason, it didn't go through. And then somebody decided to look at that guy. And he had to sell off his guns real quick or transfer them to family and avoid the potential prosecution that could come from that. Beyond that, the psych label when it comes to guns is going too far. Most people have psych at some point in their life, and now it doesn't take much to get branded with that "you can no longer own any guns" label. That's ridiculous. Um, but again, my two main focuses in New York have to be the economy and the healthcare systems. That they're using Medicaid liens to steal property. There's talk of applying that same kind of principle to Medicare. So you work all your life and you sell off your family home when you're retired at age 65. At age 65, 42.8% of the population has a diagnosed disability. So you've retired, you've sold off your family home, maybe you purchased a smaller home with a new mortgage that you can afford um, on your Social Security or retirement, whatever that may be, largely meager for most people. And when that happens, let's say you fall and break your hip and you incur medical charges you can't afford on Medicaid. They often don't bother to tell you that your property can be taken for that. You do have the option of divesting. If you divest your property as you age, interestingly enough, when you look up the word divest, it literally means to strip of rights or property. And that is the recommended way of keeping your value, which is insane. Um, you could work all of your life and have nothing to hand down to your children. You could work all of your life and have everything you worked for taken from you and be forced into an institution which is paid for by taxpayers often enough and is not a fun place to be. Our incident rate and death rate for bed sores is going up again. We've largely had a handle on that since the 70s. It is a severe issue. It's not an easy one to deal with when it goes too badly, but um, it's really just about staffing and being able to clean and dry on a regular basis. And we're not doing that. My mother was working at the veterans home as I grew up, and that's not the right place to be. That's not a nice place to be. Um, and I talk to social workers a lot. You want to hear some people who are really ticked off about the way the healthcare and the COVID-19 situation was handled here in New York. You find yourself some social workers that are actually working in it. Interestingly enough, my own care aides were not advised to use PPE, masks, or washing their hands or any of that until late April. I'm at risk. But because I'm at risk, I had them informed myself. There are plenty of people with disabilities who are not. And to that note, I want to go back to talking about the universal assessment system where the state lost my legs. That doesn't really sound like a big deal. They just marked down that he didn't have any legs on a piece of paper. Well, if that had been a different detail in a different situation with a different individual dealing with a different disability, that could be very detrimental. I have had social workers tell me that the UAS is essentially a system designed to kick people off of services that they need. Why are we paying for them? Mm-hmm. Most of these services are extremely wasteful. There's a lot of perk barreling involved. There's a lot of things tacked on. There's a lot of buddy system. There's a lot of direction of that money. They year and a half or 2 years ago, they changed the education requirements to be a services coordinator. That's someone that just knows all the services that can apply to you and make sure that you're using the ones that you need and not the ones that you don't. And by increasing that education requirement in a position that really doesn't pay all that well, they left a gap. They left a hole where there was no service coordinators to help people. That's a state move that has no excuse. If we're going to be beholden to these systems, they need to at least run them properly, and they're obviously not. In an ideal libertarian world, we'd do away with them all, and we'd all support each other on a home rule, local basis. But we live in New York here, and that's not going to happen overnight. So I am absolutely seeking any direction closer to a libertarian ideal that I can find. If it's an inch, I'll take it. If it's 10 miles, I'll take it. But I want to see a lack of restraint on our communities. I want to see a lack of restraint on our commerce. I want to see a lack of restraint on our health care. I mean, think about this. Health care that's paid for taxes is taxed. How many holes in a bucket can you catch the water from as you pour it in and then pour it back in? Sooner or later, you're going to run out of water. And that water, in this case, is tax base, tax funds. Probably when I first started reaching out individually to advocate for those with disabilities in their own situations, I realized an interesting thing in New York. Anybody who was experienced with a disability, as in they'd had one for a while, and had the means to leave New York, they were the first ones running. They were getting out of here as fast as they could. They saw it coming.
Kind of a medical version of capital flight. Wow,
Yeah.
that's quite an insight, and quite an indictment of the state of New York.
Yeah. Oh, if I felt comfortable speaking freely, meaning if I were not trying to win a political race right now, I would indict them quite more harshly.
And that's a conversation I look forward to having with you, because as we stray and everything, there's one central message tonight. Well, two really in our conversation together. Number one, it's the power of sheer will, the power of our philosophy to give you opportunities, at least avenues to pursue, to overcome this self-destructive government, that this cancer that we've created. The second, of course, and you keep harkening back to it, is, of course, the power of the free market, the unfettered free market. The way I like to reflect on it is that the free market is the mechanism. Free market capitalism is the mechanism by which the individual can realize their full human potential. And I have yet to see anyone successfully defeat me in a debate about that, because ultimately, despite the challenges one has handled and one is handing, that you are given through the free market the opportunity to find ways to support yourself, to find ways to grow, to find ways to compensate for challenges that you've been handed, I should say. And to that end, that is what your common theme throughout all this. Just simply get government out of the way and allow you to prosper.
Yeah, I can speak to that just a little more if I can for a minute.
Absolutely.
When you're on, say, SSI, as I have been most of my life, there are restraints on what you can do with that money. There are restraints on how much of that money you can save in a bank account. There are restraints on how much money you can earn before that goes away. And it's also a qualifier for health insurance. So you literally end up in this situation where I can be stuck on welfare, or I can try to work until I die, which won't be long. So you're literally stuck with this choice of staying in place, staying stuck there on welfare, or death. How many people choose death over almost anything else, right? Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with a few brave exceptions in a few extreme circumstances. But most people never choose death. And we are literally stuck there. When I was going to school, in an attempt to have me labeled with a learning disability when I was carrying books with broken arms and had 100 or more fractures at once, they sprung an IQ test at me at the end of the day, out of protocol. Children are supposed to be tested for their IQ just before lunch when they're nice and bright and vibrant. And oddly enough, when I had a head full of painkillers and a whole lot of physical trauma and was struggling through a lot, that's the only 2 times that they decided to spring an IQ test on me. Fortunately enough for me, I come from a very high IQ kind of family with a very education instilled mannerisms, right? And I did blast through those without a problem. But I remember watching the lady who gave me the test, and she was she didn't say anything. She didn't really give it away, but you could tell she didn't want to do it. She didn't want to have to give me an IQ test because she knew why she was giving it to me. And as I started taking the test and started doing well, just watching her light up and the happiness in her face, knowing that she wasn't doing what the hierarchy wanted her to do, that was amazing. And when I say hierarchy, I'm talking about the superintendent largely. His job was to rake in money.
Right. And there are so many ways that school systems manipulate data, as we know, in order to receive quote unquote rewards, which do not support or impact those who are often injured by those manipulations. In fact, they go elsewhere. We've got just a couple minutes, and before we bring David back on, as we say so many times in the show, we want you to engage in shameless self-promotion. Folks, if you're just joining us, this is an hour with the candidates. Thomas Daniel Quitter, and again, I love the logo.
Quitter, you said it right every other time.
I got all right, because I'm looking at your campaign slogan. That's where it screws me up, because you've got Quitter, never a quitter, and rarely quieter. That is a tongue twister that is simply unfair to repeat 3 times fast. But it's an outstanding statement on literally everything that you are part of. So tell us how folks can reach out, help you win in the big District 52 for the New York State Senate. Give us a website.
Interestingly enough, another point to my name. One of the old French definitions for quitter, it means to free. It's a verb. Which very libertarian. Now you can obviously find me on my website at tomfor52.com. I do have a Facebook page. If you look up, it's I believe it's Thomas Daniel Quitter for Senate. And I really need donations at this point. I'm in a very winnable race. There's only one other person in my race. He is a incumbent who is unpopular in many groups. He's unpopular with 2A groups. He's unpopular with the bodily autonomy or health care groups. He's unpopular with the Democrats, obviously, because he's a Republican. And, he is a cop. Donate to me.
There you go. This guy's pretty much nailed it, hasn't he? Let's bring David on if we could. Always a kudos and a shout out to Dan Fishman, Executive Director of the Libertarian Party, who serves also as the engineer and the cat herder for this effort we do every week. David, welcome back. First of all, one or two folks have teased me a little bit about the first few months we've done this, because I'm obviously a homer for you guys. I love everything that you stand for. We have yet to have a candidate disappoint. We've had and met and spoken with, and let's just say digitally broken bread with astonishing people from all over the country running for office at every single level. And literally living testament to the fact that despite what challenges we're facing in other areas, that the Libertarian Party is a vital, growing movement that is reaching literally into every corner of American life. David and Thomas, have you guys met each other before at different events, or do you just know each other through the Libertarian internet?
No, I've never actually met Thomas in person. I remember him actually from the online convention when he got up to speak, and he gave his campaign slogan, and it stuck with me. That's how I remembered how to pronounce his name, because it's never quieter, and it really, because that's what I want. I pronounce quieter, but no, I guess Quitter.
Right.
But no, I actually don't know him. You seem like a really outstanding libertarian, man, and I wish I lived in New York. Just kidding.
No, don't move here.
No, I live in Tennessee, which is like pretty much the most libertarian state in the union.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about buying a gun. I went and bought a gun back in March. It was a handgun, and I was in and out of the store with a gun in my pocket in 30 minutes, and it was fantastic.
Somewhere, one of our more progressive friends went into a Harry Potter-esque collapse, clutching their temples.
It's like magic. It is.
Thank you, David, for that. Listen, you guys, we're informal here. Let's have a minute or two of fun. Do you guys have any advice for each other? I mean, you've had a chance to listen to both of each other's stories. They're very provocative, and I think both of you have great opportunities for success here. What would you say to each other in terms of tips, or what do you like? What do you like?
If you're trying to grow the party, if you're trying to make new libertarians, I find that two of the best ways to do that is one that actually David mentioned in his spot earlier, and that's doing the work, that's doing the voluntary stuff. But another one that I find works quite well is if you can find the people who don't know where they are, but they want to be active, they want to do something, the easiest way to do that is to show them the statement of principles on the LP website. And that works so well. I actually, there's a write-in candidate for village mayor of Afton and a write-in candidate for trustee of that same village. And I had been working on Melissa Matthews, the mayoral candidate, for almost a year to become a libertarian. And Alexis didn't know where she stood. But I showed them the statement of principles. I had a short conversation with them, and now they're all very libertarian. It's real easy to get people to grasp onto our ideals when you just show them that all we want to do is what's right.
Oh yeah, I've had several friends of mine who have seen my engagement with the with volunteer work, that they have started to volunteer too. And like we're talking guys my age, like late 30s, early 40s, and they're just like, I don't know, just they're attracted to what I'm doing. They see that I'm taking action, and they feel like, I guess there's like a fear of missing out. Like, he's going to do this awesome thing for the community, and I'm not there too. And a couple of those guys have turned into almost practically full libertarians, because I told them that the reason that I'm doing a lot of this is that, voluntary action is a good part of, the system for libertarianism and individual liberty. They see my care for disadvantaged people as an extension of my libertarianism, and it's drawing them to it. I like you, I've probably told a couple people to check out the platform, and it's really an effective tool. And Joe has been really helpful too. Joe Jorgensen, she has been fantastic. A lot of my friends are actually really excited about her candidacy, and it's people I had never imagined that would ever look at a libertarian candidate, and they actually really like her. So I think we have a good opportunity to grow the membership, and use campaigns like mine and Tom's to recruit more people for the cause, if you will. And I think we're going to do a lot of good this year.
David, are you going to Orlando?
Oh yeah. I got my room booked. I'm staying at the Rosen.
Me too. As long as everything works out with the timing, a neighboring county chair, Mark Brayman from Madison County, wants me to bring 900 masks with Joe Jorgensen printed across black with gold print. Make sure you grab one. Oh,
nice. Yeah, I would definitely grab one. I have a case of the. Recently, our governor had got some masks from a sock company, but they had been treated by pesticides, and they handed them out to all the local government agencies and the Tennessee National Guard, and they were told not to wear the masks because they could be dangerous. And then the Tennessee National Guard ends up on national news wearing the masks in Washington D.C., putting down protesters, sadly. And kudos to the Tennessee National Guard. They actually put down their shields and stood in solidarity with the protesters, and took a less aggressive stance, because that is the Tennessee way.
Yes. Anybody who will lay down their arms and keep their oath, that's a hero.
Strength through peace, my brothers. That's the way we can do this.
Gentlemen, congratulations. I just, since you both brought it up, I just want to close on these words, if you will, tonight. No more powerful words that I think have ever been written by normal men and women. And I just, in times like this, it still gives me chills. It still gives me pause to get choked up a little bit. And of course, we, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. Gentlemen, you and the candidates that we've had on over the past few months are the living embodiment of that spirit. I wish you nothing but the best. I hope to see all of you in Orlando. I think we're going to have like a mini meetup for all the folks who've been on the show and all the folks who want to join us on the show, and to celebrate, to join together, if you will, and preach to that spirit. Folks, you've been listening to An Hour with the Candidates. A big shout out, first of all, to the Libertarian Party, who supports LPTV, my good friend Dan Fishman, who is the executive director and serves as the technical consultant and, if you will, the man behind the curtain making this all work. Nick Sarwak, who conceived of this with Dan and gave it its blessing and support. And of course, to all of you fellow libertarian men and women, as we really, in the coming weeks, dive into the challenges that the 2020 election represents to us. Not only diving into the challenges, but sensing and seizing upon the opportunity that this gives us to challenge that omnipotent state and just demonstrate to people at large our ability, the right to defend the rights of the individual. Folks, if you want to join us on this show, please reach out to me. There's a couple of ways you can do it. hourwiththecandidates@gmail.com. You can go onto the LPTV Facebook page, which we implore you to follow and share and support. Really to share the efforts of these men and women who are running candidacies. And there's some other programming that's starting to pop up on the show as well. Almost weekly now, there's weekly offerings about the libertarian movement. Share and like the page, reach out to us. We'll see you next Friday. We've already got a couple of great people lined up. We are an Hour with the Candidates. Have a wonderful week, and thanks you all for listening and watching. Good night.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, take care.